I do not encourage or condone any products, actions, or behaviors shown in this video except engaging with poetry. Please do not attempt to replicate any actions performed during the video except reading and critical analysis. All actions are performed by professionals. Prologue. To the reader. Remember these poems. They have no meaning to me, no meaning to you, yet maybe, who knows, to the reader, maybe they do, but they don't. These are bad poems with no correlation and no meaning. Enjoy. So, that was the first poem in Jacob Jones's poetry collection, Poems to Read While Smoking Cigarettes. This poem is kind of similar to the book's preface on page 3, which reads, "This is a poetry book. Nothing more, nothing less." Is that really the case? Who knows? Enjoy. And while that's kind of funny in its lack of surety, the poem doesn't quite land the same way, especially when coming immediately after this preface. I'm sure Jones is being ironic with this piece because the poems in the collection absolutely are correlated, but it's kind of the same problem I had with a lot of Bo Burnham's poems, where it feels like we're just lampshading. The irony doesn't automatically make the poem good. But I will say this, unironically, I do find some of these line breaks effective, most particularly in the opening lines. There's a charge to remember these, and the speaker soon clarifies these poems, but do they perhaps mean something more beyond that? And again, that further presses on the irony in saying these poems have no meaning. If you're unfamiliar with Jacob Jones, as I was before making this video, he's a relatively big YouTuber. Most of his content revolves around smoking, drinking, and talking to the camera about basically whatever. I'm certainly no expert on the guy, but I've watched a couple of his videos and I can see the appeal. He has a dry humor about him, there's something undoubtedly hilarious in having a YouTube persona around drinking and smoking. What's more, Jacob just seems like a really charming fellow. There's a strange and unexpected optimism in his videos that's so refreshing. It's not hard to see why this guy's popular and why people would turn on his videos for a sense of company. Now, that said, because I don't know the guy, I wouldn't even be checking this book out if it weren't for several of you who told me to. As with any buzzing poetry release, I was admittedly curious, and so here we are. But just remember, as with several of the celebrity collections I cover on this channel, I'm probably missing a lot of context in some of these poems because I'm not super plugged into Jacob's content, and we'll talk about that more later. I won't beat around the bush, I didn't love Jacob's collection. That said, there is something to it. So without giving away too much of the book's contents, I do want to showcase a few poems that I feel are representative of the work as a whole, and even show a few of my favorites, while also, hopefully, teaching all of us a thing or two about poetry more broadly. So before we jump back into any one of the poems, let's just take a look at the presentation for a second. It's weird. Putting multiple poems on the same page of a collection is not exactly kosher, and it's kind of a lot for the eyes to take in all at once with the illustrations, too. I don't entirely know how to feel about it. I won't let it affect my opinions on the poems themselves, but again, it's just kind of weird. At the very least, though, Jacob's not wasting any paper, and I'll give him that. I've said it before, but so many celebrity releases feel like they're artificially inflating the page count. So I genuinely really appreciate Jacob delivering his material in as few pages as possible, as funny as that might sound. But hey, real quick, are you sick of all the AI shoved into spaces it doesn't need to be, especially your writing tools? And even if there's no evident AI assistant, it's likely that your writing software is using your writing to train AI. If you're absolutely fed up with it, you should start using the sponsor of today's video, Ellipsis. Ellipsis is an LGBTQ+ founded company made by writers for writers. With Ellipsis's free writing platform, you know that your experience will always be human first. Ellipsis will never use your writing to train AI, nor will they sell your information to any third parties. And with Ellipsis Plus, you'll unlock perks like the Emboss feature to prove your work isn't AI generated, and the Writing Insights feature to help keep your worst writing habits in check. Ellipsis's core features will always be free to use, and if you choose to pay for Ellipsis Plus, you will eventually own it, no matter how you choose to pay for it. You won't be locked into a subscription for the rest of your life. Ellipsis is also pro-human in its emphasis on collaboration. Ellipsis makes it easy to comment on your friends' work, and with Ellipsis's vibrant community, you can join the Discord server to find writing buddies and accountability partners. You can use the QR code on screen or my link, ellipsis.app/rd, to start using Ellipsis today for free. You can also start a 7-day trial of Ellipsis Plus without having to give any payment information. So what are you waiting for? Get on board. Thanks so much to Ellipsis for sponsoring this video. Now, getting back to the poetry, let me show you this piece on page 11. Cube. The idea is open. Open to the imagination. The hand is closed. Closed to the mind. Hand to paper, no. Hand to brain, no. Locked away, sealed away, not forever, not for all time, but for now. The idea. This is highly emblematic of Jones's poetic style. There's a strange stream of consciousness type quality to the pieces where it seems ideas are forming in real time as the poem is being written and as it's being read. We see this, for example, in the sections of the poem that read like fragments and in the repetition of words and phrases that eventually form a developed idea. I would say this is arguably among the better poems in the book because it leaves more room for thought. It's not just a self-referential joke that ultimately feels closed-ended. Here, the reader actually has to wonder why this poem is titled Cube, for example. What do the contents of the poem say about that title, and vice versa? There's also an interesting progression to this piece. We start with the idea itself being open, but once we reach the end of the poem, the open idea is locked away, sealed away, but not forever. Perhaps it's sealed away in a cube. What does it mean for the idea to be open but locked away for now? And why is the hand closed to the mind? What exactly does that mean? I like that we can ask these questions and try to find answers within the text. It almost reads as a reflection on the creative process and being unable to say what it is you want or need to say. But maybe I'm reading too much into it, and it's important we acknowledge that for a moment. A lot of the pieces in the book do seem to be humor first in their intentionality. I suppose I can't say that for certain, but a lot of these read as jokes first and foremost. If that's your thing, then more power to you. But we'll talk about why a lot of these didn't always land for me. Here's the thing, if you feel the same way as I do about repetition in poetry, this book is probably not for you. If you followed me for a long time, you know what I'm talking about, but if you're new here, let me explain. I don't outright hate repetition in poetry. Repetition as a device exists for a reason. That reason is case by case in most poems, but largely an author uses repetition for emphasis or for a rhythmic quality. Oftentimes, when I see amateur poetry, I see a heavy reliance on repetition, because beginner poets know that repetition is a tool often used in poetry that's not quite as prevalent in prose in the same way. As such, repetition is a quick and easy way for a beginner poet to mark their poetry as poetry. But what tends to happen is the repetition will undermine itself. Good repetition makes a reader slow down and reconsider things, but bad repetition actually makes a reader want to speed up and skip through the text, which is generally the opposite of what you want as a poet. You want the reader to linger in the length of the poem, no matter how long it actually is. What's more, when repetition is used frivolously, it can take away from the power of the repeated phrase. Take a look at this piece called Really Big Poem. This is a really big poem. This is a really big poem. This is a really big poem. And those 3 lines repeat 6 more times. Maybe it seems unfair to criticize this poem for its repetition when that's the whole joke. It's long for the sake of being long. But again, the lamp shading doesn't do it for me personally, and while that's the joke of this poem, I find other poems are similarly repetitious to an underwhelming effect. We could compare this to the first section of Joy Harjo's poem called She Had Some Horses, which I won't read because it is quite lengthy, but I'd definitely encourage you to read it. As the poem goes on, even in just this first section, we quickly come to understand that the horses are not really horses, and so it prompts the question, why is Harjo using horses, and what exactly is it these horses are truly describing? Or for a shorter example of Harjo's, we can look at this piece. Remember. Remember the sky that you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon. Know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn. That is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father. He is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember you are all people and all people are you. Remember you are this universe and this universe is you. Remember all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember language comes from this. Remember the dance language is, that life is. Remember. Now, to be honest, this is really not among my favorites when it comes to Harjo, and in a way, I think the repetition is a contributing factor there, but I think it's hard to deny that the repetition is having its intended effect. This is a poem about memory. It's meant to be plain and accessible because Harjo is clearly communicating something she deems important. The word remember in this poem is a mandate. It is of the utmost importance that you remember. It's the word that opens and closes the poem. There are many individual sections in this poem which I love, but I'll just highlight a few. Remember your birth is interesting as it's tied for the longest mandate in the poem at 3 full lines. It definitely strikes a chord with me on a personal level because of my mother. Then, another longer section, remember the plants, trees, animal life. I love how Harjo refers to these groups as having tribes. Of the many personifications in this poem, that one might be my favorite. Then there's remember you are all people and all people are you. It's a surprisingly effective line break in a piece of parallelism that feels obvious but still hits hard. Now, all that being said, if all of Joy Harjo's poems read this way, I would really get annoyed, and that's kind of the problem with Jones's collection. While I applaud Jones for finding his own poetic voice and style, it just really wasn't for me. I got tired of it pretty quickly. After about 30 pages, I was ready to tap out. Even so, I will show you a few more pieces on which I have something that I feel is worth saying, including a couple of my favorite poems in the book. Let's start with this piece. Bad poem. Is this a poem or not? Technically speaking, it is, right? But is it really? And if it is this a good poem or a bad poem? Is this even a poem to begin with? So on the one hand, this almost reads like a lampooning of low-effort contemporary poetry, but it doesn't really land when a lot of the poems in this collection also feel like low-effort contemporary poems. On the other hand, the poem asks a worthy question. What actually is a poem? What counts as a poem? I've talked about that before multiple times on this channel, and I'll just quickly reiterate my stance here. If an author says that a piece is a poem, then it's a poem, regardless of quality. In the same vein as this piece, many poems in the collection would appear to serve as meta-commentaries on art or poetry or language itself. But again, similar to many of Bo Burnham's poems, I often found these pieces either shallow, on the nose, or both. I understand the irony Jones is going for with such pieces, but it's not exactly groundbreaking, you know what I mean? And when multiple poems in the collection read like this one, it doesn't even have the virtue of novelty on its side. Similar to these arguable meta-commentaries, Jones has a few Gertrude Stein-esque pieces that don't have much to them besides the reordering of words that almost reads like a machine malfunctioning. Most of these I find pretty uninteresting at best and annoying at worst. As with the meta-commentaries, they lose their novelty pretty quickly. This one, however, I think actually might have something to it. Atmosphere. To define. To define atmosphere, one could define many items. The atmosphere, and the atmosphere. Many different definitions, many different contexts, other words, other phrases have to be said to correlate. Is that an atmosphere in of itself? Maybe. One thing for certain, atmosphere is one word that makes English, English. So this isn't Stein-ish in the same way some of the other ones are, but it is still linguistically diagnostic. It's trying to draw attention to language itself. While I do read the piece mostly as a joke, I feel like the ending is getting at some critical theory, whether intentionally or not. I feel there is some sincerity to this piece. There's a level to it that's actually trying to interrogate what the word atmosphere means and why it is the word atmosphere. And ultimately, I think the conclusion is played straight. Atmosphere is a strange word, but it's part of what makes English what it is. English is a strange language, and that's kind of awesome. Again, maybe I'm reading into this one too much. Let me know what you think. I also like how Jones suggests that the etymology and different contexts around atmosphere are atmospheres unto themselves, again, getting at some critical theory in an admittedly funny way. Then we have this piece. To be. To be is to be. To be is. This one is definitely more Stein-esque, and it's honestly not a half-bad demonstration of what a poet can do with few words and effective line breaks. The poem is also clearly playing on the relationship between these three words, is and to be, both being different forms of the same verb. The poem is literally saying that to be is the same as is, but philosophically and linguistically, a reader still wonders what that means. Is there a difference between those two states of being? Once again, am I going too deep here? With that, I'll show you my favorite poem in the collection, which I also think is the longest in the collection, so brace yourself. Blue. Light blue, white-gray bird at the top, red text, black border, very thin, almost unnoticeable unless looked at closely. Black text, red insert, or is it red text, black border, very, very thick, black border. Below, metallic silver, borders a red, in front a character, black details, red details, white details, below to the side, black text, an advertisement. Flipping around, to the right, light blue, black text, regulation, black line, an advertisement, another, an acknowledgement, white, black lines, below, regulation, all black. Flipping around, to the right, light blue, to the left, red text, black border, very thin, almost unnoticeable. Black text, red insert, or is it red text, black border, very, very thick, black border, below, black text, an advertisement, to the right, metallic silver, borders, a red circle, in front of, a character, black, red details, white details, below, an advertisement, black text, bold at first. Mellows to normal, advertisement, metallic gray line stretching across, advertisement, disguised, metallic gray line stretching across but interrupted, metallic gray, small but good, black text, advertisement. Flipping around, to the right, light blue, regulation, all black, thin lettering. Flipping below, light blue, red text, black border, very thin, almost unnoticeable, black text, red insert, or is it, red text, black border, very, very thick, black border, to the left, white text, flipping twice, above. Light blue, red text, black border, very thin, almost unnoticeable, black text, red insert, or is it, red text, black border, very, very thick, black border, below, black text, advertisement, to the right, metallic silver, borders, a red circle, in front, a character, black, red details, white details, to the left, black text, a description, blue. So on its face, I should hate this, and frankly I do think it's way too long. I think it could have been shorter while still getting the point across. Even so, I ended up writing the most notes on this poem compared to any other in my initial read-through. It's still annoying to read, as with many pieces in the book, but it communicates something, if I'm interpreting it correctly. And all things considered, with this piece, the annoyance in reading might be intentional. In my mind, the most important word in the poem is advertisement. Perhaps I'm extrapolating a little too much here, but it sounds like the speaker is describing an open sky that's being constantly interrupted by billboards. As such, the poem is annoying to read in the same way a constant barrage of advertisements is annoying, especially when covering something as beautiful as the sky. The color blue starts the poem and returns at the end, but it's not the same light blue from the beginning. To me, the final blue reads more as a description of the speaker. I'm not 100% confident in this interpretation, but a poem that's purely description is wont to offer itself up to many interpretations. This isn't the only poem of its type, a poem that's purely visual description, but it's certainly the longest. Even though I said that one was my favorite, in writing this video, I actually think I might have changed my mind. This one might be my true favorite. It's another longer one, but not quite as long as the last one. It reads, Sky blue, hat on top. Light blue on the horizon. Lush greenery in the background. A woman appears, floating in midair. She speaks, but what is said is not said. Above a town she wears a dress, sitting down she leans back, floating in midair. Looking down, roads, along which greenery, red-roofed houses, waterfronts, ports, docks, and trains run near. The woman continues. She continues floating in midair. It's odd. How does she do that? Although where do, that's not right. How is she there? No one notices. Yet here she is, right there, right next door, in the sky. How? The woman looks, she speaks once more. The wind, it masks, cannot hear, so close yet so far. Above a town, a lush, colorful town. Two try to speak, but no speaking is done. Cannot hear, yet can see, and yet nothing can be done. Standing on the ground, unable to move, trapped by the inability to hear, trapped by the inability to hear her voice. This one is pretty unique for Jacob in its surrealism. Most of his poems really are not like this one. The floating woman is curious enough on her own, but in the last stanza we get that transition to the two parties trying to speak. And it's possible that the woman is one of those two parties or is completely separate from them. I might be projecting too much of myself onto the reading, but there's a sense that the two trying to speak cannot speak because one of them is too preoccupied with the woman floating above the town. As it says, nothing can be done standing on the ground. It would seem the floating woman represents something greater, whether that's a longing for greener pastures or the very idea of hope itself. It could be that the two parties on the ground can't communicate because neither one is achieving what they aspire to achieve. They want to float too, but are unable, and as such don't feel like their true selves. They are trapped. In that sense, it almost feels like there's a socioeconomic reading of the poem as well. And on the other hand, it might just be a commentary on point of view. This town is so lush and colorful, but the parties on the ground can unfortunately never know that. They cannot float, nor can they hear the voice of the one who floats. In thinking about it from that point of view, and again, I'm probably interpreting far beyond what's actually in the poem, but it almost sounds like the experience of a gay or trans youth breaking off from their parents, floating away while their family remains grounded. With just how ambiguous the poem is, there are a lot of ways to interpret it, and I think I've honestly gone too far beyond what's in the text. But, as always, I would love to hear all of your interpretations as well. I'll also quickly note that this piece vaguely reminded me of another Joy Harjo piece, a poem titled The Woman Hanging from the 13th Floor Window, but the similarities are slightly superficial. Even so, it's one of my favorite Harjo poems, so I thought I'd give it a read here. The Woman Hanging from the 13th Floor Window. She is the woman hanging from the 13th floor window. Her hands are pressed white against the concrete molding of the tenement building. She hangs from the 13th floor window in East Chicago with a swirl of birds over her head. They could be a halo or a storm of glass waiting to crush her. She thinks she will be set free, the woman hanging from the 13th floor window. On the east side of Chicago is not alone. She is a woman of children, of the baby, Carlos, and of Margaret, and of Jimmy, who is the oldest. She is her mother's daughter and her father's son. She is several pieces between the two husbands she has had. She is all the women of the apartment building who stand watching her, watching themselves. When she was young, she ate wild rice on scraped down plates in warm wood rooms. It was in the farther north, and she was the baby then. They rocked her. She sees Lake Michigan lapping at the shores of herself. It is a dizzy hole of water, and the rich live in tall glass houses at the edge of it. In some places, Lake Michigan speaks softly. Here, it just sputters and butts itself against the asphalt. She sees other buildings just like hers. She sees other women hanging from many floored windows, counting their lives in the palms of their hands and in the palms of their children's hands. She is the woman hanging from the 13th floor window on the Indian side of town. Her belly is soft from her children's births. Her worn Levi's swing down below her waist, and then her feet, and then her heart. She is dangling. The woman hanging from the 13th floor hears voices. They come to her in the night when the lights have gone dim. Sometimes they are little cats mewing and scratching at the door. Sometimes they are her grandmother's voice. And sometimes they are gigantic men of light whispering to her to get up, to get up, to get up. That's when she wants to have another child to hold onto in the night, to be able to fall back into dreams. And the woman hanging from the 13th floor window hears other voices. Some of them scream out from below for her to jump. They would push her over. Others cry softly from the sidewalks, pull their children up like flowers and gather them into their arms. They would help her, like themselves. But she is the woman hanging from the 13th floor window, and she knows she is hanging by her own fingers, her own skin, her own thread of indecision. She thinks of Carlos, of Margaret, of Jimmy. She thinks of her father and of her mother. She thinks of all the women she has been, of all the men. She thinks of the color of her skin and of Chicago streets and of waterfalls and pines. She thinks of moonlight nights and of cool spring storms. Her mind chatters like neon and northside bars. She thinks of the 4 a.m. lonelinesses that have folded her up like death, discordant without logical and beautiful conclusion. Her teeth break off at the edges. She would speak. The woman hangs from the 13th floor window, crying for the lost beauty of her own life. She sees the sun falling west over the gray plain of Chicago. She thinks she remembers listening to her own life break loose as she falls from the 13th floor window on the east side of Chicago, or as she climbs back up to claim herself again. So, like I said, the connection to Jones's poem is superficial. More than anything, they both just have a woman at their center. While Jones's piece reads more like a surreal allegory, Harjo's piece is a very specific portrait of this woman in a terrifying circumstance. This woman, though, is also representative of many different types of people, and in particular Native Americans in urban America in the 1970s and 80s. And even though I'm not Native American nor a woman, the poem does impact me personally as it makes me consider the many lives who have all formed mine. What's more, there's a personal struggle in this poem that resonates with me. Our titular woman is battling with the decision to let go completely. While the poem ends on a bit of an ambiguous note, it's significant to me that given the two options between falling and climbing, Harjo chose to end the poem on the option to climb. That to me speaks to a sense of hope. Even though our lives can lose beauty and turn loose, we don't have to give up. We can always reclaim them. We can reclaim ourselves. I quickly want to point out that there's a 6-7 joke and a 69 joke in this book. I feel like I'm saying that judgmentally, but truthfully, I'm not above that myself. I just didn't happen to find these ones super funny. But with that, let's get into my overall thoughts on the book, starting with some of the more critical notes I have. As with many collections I look at on this channel, I really wish I had a peek behind the curtain on this one. I would love to know more about Jones's poetic influences. And I'm sorry, this will sound a little mean, but the collection reads kind of like it could have been written in a single day. Maybe that's hyperbolic. All I mean to say is I'd be interested to know more about the process. With many of these poems, I was mostly just left asking, what was the point of that? I feel like I've said that before in some of these videos. In Jones's work, though, you can make the point that the poems are just meant to be humorous above all else. And if that's your cup of tea, that's great. But I don't know. Personally, I was hoping for more. And I want this made clear, I am certainly not the comedy authority. Many of you know that from my videos alone. But I didn't find a lot of these to be very funny. Take that with a big grain of salt, because by my own admission, the collection kind of annoyed me. So I reiterate, just might not be my cup of tea. But one thing I haven't mentioned yet is the book's back cover. In his blurb, he gives an example of the type of poetry you might find in the book, then writes, "Was that a good poem? No. The poem above and the poems in this book are not good poems, but as the name of this book implies, these are poems to read while smoking cigarettes." And let's be honest, I can appreciate the self-awareness. I will say, given Jacob's penchant for irony, I'm not sure he really means that fully, and I'll re-emphasize that there were at least a few poems here that I liked. The Amazon listing, though, is the same way, featuring an acknowledgement that the poems in the collection are not good, at least according to Jacob. There's definitely a conversation to be had about making bad art on purpose. I think we've dipped into that on this channel before. It seems to me that Jacob wrote this book, first and foremost, for himself. And hold that thought. And secondly, for his fans. So if Jacob's followers got some enjoyment out of this, honestly, more power to them. And hey, at least Jacob took a stab at poetry. I have to give him props for that. Genuinely. And he did it with his own flavor. Is his style for me? No, not really. But man, at least he sets himself apart, if not in content, then in style. So many celebrity poems or Insta poems read like they could have been written by anyone. And I suppose that's the case for a good chunk of Jacob's poems, but many of them very clearly have his own distinct poetic voice, and that's pretty impressive if you ask me. Jacob initially put out an announcement for the book on his second channel, Jacob Jones Money, with a video titled, "I've made a poetry book." And let me just say, this video is funny. I laughed when he took a moment to distinguish hardcover from softcover. And I loved the casualness with which he said Jacob X Jones was his writer name. The guy clearly has a dry wit about him. In this video, he reveals the book was a 2-year process of writing poems here and there, doing some doodles, and eventually compiling the whole thing into one book. Again, I commend him for getting into poetry in the first place and eventually putting this together. That's truly awesome. In this video, Jacob has an energy about him, saying how happy and proud he felt about the book, and that energy is honestly really infectious. In this video, Jacob says he's now a professional poet because he's written and compiled this book, and while I think he's being a little coy when he says that, there's an interesting debate to be had about that subject. What does make someone a poet as opposed to just someone who writes poetry, you know what I mean? For more on that, you can watch my friend Danae's video. Compared to so many other higher profile poetry collections, the price for this one is much more reasonable, which I also appreciate. Thank you, Jacob, for making your book more accessible to your fans. Speaking of which, if you like poetry, there are some highlights in this book, but as the reviews will tell you, this really is a work that's meant more for Jacob's own fans and followers rather than for fans of poetry. A lot of the poems are direct references to his videos and lexicon, which those unfamiliar with Jacob obviously won't pick up on. I didn't until after the fact. But hey, what did you think of the poems featured in this video? Are you a fan of Jacob's? If you have the book, what do you think of it? Please tell me everything. And hey, before you go, take a look at this piece. This is a poem by one of my patrons, Drew Rhine. Dirge for the Honey Eaters. Gone the way of the Mohoi Dai, tincture sour on my tongue, in the hollows, seen extinction, distinct bowers marked and hung. Gong a ways out by the Nell kneelers, microplastique macro waves, monarch's pyroclastic palanquin consumed in plumes and saved. Gone the ways of the honey eaters, stinking thylacines and ox, amongst aurochs beastly burdens, lays the bone ground which we walk. Gong away echoed the ah la la, overcrowded caulking coasts, bottlenecking evolution, lucky living choking boast. For the chance to see your work at the end of my videos, or if you just like what I do and want to support, you can donate to me on Patreon too. For just $3 a month, you can see videos early, hear about the books I'm reading each month, and join the community Discord. We do prompts and open mics in there, it's a ton of fun. There's also an extended version of this very video you can check out on Patreon too. I've got merch now, which is a great way to support the channel while getting something in return. If you want to support in non-monetary ways, all the algorithm stuff really does help a lot. Like, comment, subscribe, hype, share, remember the sky you were born under, that sort of thing. You can follow me on my socials if you want, but no matter what, keep reading, keep writing, and ultimately keep in mind, this is a rough draft. And, for sticking around till the end of the video, have a writing prompt. Today, I want you to take either smoke or cigarettes, one, the other, or both, and subvert those symbols. These are sort of cliches in poetry, so what can you do to make them fresh? I'll give you a jumping off point if you want. Write a poem or short story where you compare smoke and or cigarettes to something totally random or hyper-specific. For example, smoke is like the complete box set of Pinky and the Brain, or cigarettes remind me of the blue bird bath in my neighbor's backyard growing up. You can use those as your starting points if you want, but I'd encourage you to come up with a metaphor or association of your own. The time is yours now. Get to writing.